Good evening. We are going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:05. We will start with our roll call, Dr. Means.
Ms. Newman. Dr. Dykeman.
Here.
Mr. Worthy.
Here.
Ms. Davis.
Here.
Dr. Gann.
Here.
Dr. Nuns.
Here.
Okay, and now we are going to have our silent meditation, so we will stand. All about the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so based on where we are right now, we can amend or adopt our agenda. Are there any?
Yes, Madam President, I'd like to amend the agenda just for discussion where, I don't know exactly where to put this, but that we would put it the last item before we adjourn. To discuss among board members, we have 3 budget hearings coming up. First one, the 28th of this month, 30th of this month, and June 4th. Normally, the entire board is not required to be there, but normally we have representatives from the board there. So I like to amend the agenda. We're going to put that after, just before the executive session. Discussion.
One second here. You said right after the executive?
Before.
Before the executive session? Okay, so as we all know, this is my first night, so let's just see how this goes. This will take the place of F, and then we will go into executive session. Is that what I'm understanding?
It'll be just before we have.
Okay. And Mr. Worthy, you want to discuss those dates and those hearings
Make a decision.
about attendance? I see.
Normally we have 4. We don't need 4. We just discuss who's going to attend what budget hearing. One on the 28th is at APS, and one on the 30th is at Ames Elementary, and one June 4th is right here at HTM.
Okay.
Madam President, I think Mr. Worthy is accurate in making the adjustment. And we talked about this maybe 2 weeks ago, but there is a legal obligation for the Board of Education to be present for those hearings. And he's accurate. Typically, the board has had at least 2 members present for those hearings. And just scheduling from a scheduling perspective, I think that's what Mr. Worthy is trying to achieve with this amendment of the agenda.
Sure. So in adding that to our agenda, that is not something we need to vote on, or it is something we need to vote on? Okay. I see. Okay.
So I will second that amendment. And then we probably need to vote on it now. Yeah, we can vote on that and then go to adopt it.
All right, so John, you second the amendment. All right, and so at this point, we would need to all vote those in favor of the amendment. Okay, if we could raise our hands, those are in favor of the amendment. All right. And Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Alright. And,
Second.
alright. And so at this point, we need to vote on, the amended agenda. Is that correct? Okay, all in favor? All right, any opposed? Unanimous? Thank you. All right, so we will move forward with the next area on our agenda, which discusses cafeteria serving lines in Cedar Shoals School.
Yes, Madam President, thank you for the opportunity. The board will remember you acted on this item just a few weeks ago through our purchasing department and Ms. Veronica Jackson. We found out that there's some challenges with the language with the vendor. And so what they actually presented to us was not accurate in terms of what you approved. And so we felt it to be more transparent, we needed to bring it back to you based on their new terms. So that's why it's in front of you again.
Okay, are there any
And that's it.
questions about, okay.
Let's go ahead. So, move to approve this.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Open it up for discussion. Okay.
So, Dr. Means said there was just a misunderstanding, and when it was clarified, they weren't the lowest bid anymore. Correct. Got it.
Any other questions or points of discussion? Okay, so we move forward with the vote. Okay, all in favor? None opposed? All right, now we are at our personnel recommendations. I don't see any.
I think there was some personnel,
Okay.
the sheet of personnel items placed at the seat of each board member.
Okay.
This is the time of the year where we see a lot of transition, and so you will see a number of different activities within this board report. We always host this activity and board briefs the following day. I think of the public's interest, people will be interested in knowing about their transfers, because we've gone through the interview process for 3 elementary schools and have recommendations for 2 elementary schools and a middle school. We're recommending that April Braswell become the new principal at Whitehead Road Elementary School, that Allison Nobles become the new principal at Barnett Shoal Elementary School, and Christopher Penley become the new principal at Clark Middle School. That's among all of these other activities, but I know from a public interest that's of interest and people are watching it. We're continuing. We had interviews today for Alps Road Elementary School, and we are going to have interviews for Fowler Drive in the next week or so. So we're continuing to go through this process. If you remember, we scheduled this meeting for 2 reasons. One was this very item to act on principal hires, and then the second was to deal with budget questions. Yes, sir. Sure, it's under transfers, because these are all 3 of these individuals are currently assistant principals in our district. April Braswell is currently an assistant principal at Hoyle Middle School. We're recommending her for Whitehead Road Elementary School as the 3rd name down. The 10th name down is Allison Nobles. She's currently the assistant principal at Barnett Shoals. We're recommending that she assume the role of principal. And the 12th name down is Christopher Penley. He's currently the assistant principal at Clark Middle School. We're recommending that he assume the role of principal at that school.
So with this particular report, we have a vote, we take a vote on these, and so would there be a motion to now?
I recommend approval of all these items. But if, I just, again, for the public's interest, I want to point out the three additional recommendations.
I vote that we accept the superintendent's recommendation personally.
Second.
All in favor?
Madam President, if I may, I just want to acknowledge Mr. Worthy. He talked about the Aspiring Principal Program that was in place years ago in the district. We've started that up again. 2 of these candidates that we recommended to you went through our Aspiring Principal Program. So April Braswell and Chris Quigley, they worked through our process. We're trying to be more metric-driven, data-driven, and have clear expectations and competencies for the principalship so people know what they're getting into. And we were able to express what those expectations were through that Aspiring Principal program. So,
Thank you very much.
I guess good things come back around.
I'm proud to say that I already Braswell in this zone district as a math teacher at Cedar.
Yes, sir.
That's good to hear that it sounds like the infrastructure for that pathway is being built.
Well, Madam President, I guess the other thing I do want to point out, if you remember in that HR presentation we made, we learned that people are more loyal to your organization if they are promoted from within versus bringing in external. So we try not to bring in external. You're better off building the capacity of your own people, and so it's really we're excited about these 3.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, help my memory. Did we vote? We just voted on that.
You did vote.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Knox. Now it's time for our presentation of the budget.
And Madam President, board members, committee members, we don't have a formal presentation.
Okay.
Mr. Hamill made his presentation. I want to thank the members of the Finance Committee. There was a charge given to me, not directly, but there was a charge nonetheless given to me, I think around December, at a Finance Committee meeting of pointing out where other districts have put together some type of overview document in anticipation of our May 28th, 30th, and June 4th meetings. We have created a document for the public that gives an overview of items that we're recommending as new budget initiatives, but also it gives you a sense of who we are as a school district. There's some academic data in here. There's some information around our organizational chart. I know board members received it today, so you probably are still getting into it. But we'll post this on the website. Mr. Davis, who isn't here tonight, I think made a very good suggestion, and we can attach this to a revision of this document. There's a proposal to create a community engagement or community activist position, and we have a tentative job description. We can put that link of the job description into that initiative page, and I think that initiative is actually on page 19. Looks like we lost a letter, at least on my table of contents as well, on community support specialists, but we'll put the link of that job description in here as well.
Okay.
But we're here to answer any questions that you may have. I know board members received the large binder. We made the presentation. We're open to any questions that you may have. I think the explanation of the initiatives that starts on page 14 of this document gives you more logic behind why we're making the recommendations that we are for positions. So if I may, I'll just keep talking until one of you stop me and you have your questions. There was a total of 8 different initiatives. The first was ensuring that we pay for athletic trainers at our high schools. prior to last year, we didn't have trainers at our high schools, and we entered a multi-year contract with Piedmont Regional. The first year of the training services were this year, and they were at no cost. But now we will start incurring costs, and so we wanted to put money aside, and so we've done that, and that's why that item is in our initiatives. The Assistant Chief of Police, we're making a recommendation that we add another police officer to the school district's Department of Policing for a number of different reasons. One is to hire someone who has a perspective on policing in a school and knowing how to work with adolescents and not relying so heavily on our ACCPD, who will have trained, they're trained a different way, and they'll look at policing in a different way. And we talked in that explanation that starts on page 16 as to how a school-based police officer is different than a police officer from ACCPD. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to support all of our schools through that position. Our ESOL department continues to grow. On page 17, you'll know that we have quite a number of students who are served through our ESOL services. It's almost 16% of our overall student population. Without clerical support for that work, it really becomes difficult for the ESOL coordinator to address all the different strategic priorities that we need to address for those students. We've mentioned earlier, but our communities and schools partnership is stronger than ever. And this is the first year that we are recommending that we put money aside in our general fund to support communities and schools coordinators. We have a vision of scaling up the site coordinator position throughout our school system, but we want to start at the elementary level and again scale up to go back to the high school at some point. So we are pivoting away for a temporary period of time, but we hope to be back soon. And so that's why that $75,000 line item is there. We talked earlier about the community support specialist position, and that's probably the best, that's the title that we've landed on. I've been calling it a community activist role of someone who's out in the community. And you see some of the logic behind it on page 19. And again, we promise to have a preliminary job description linked to this page for the public's review and for the board's review, obviously. We are proposing an increase in social emotional staff. You will see on page 20 all the different areas that we're proposing. It ranges from increasing school nursing to additional counselors. That will provide each middle school with 2 counselors each, an additional school psychologist, an additional social worker. We are looking to increase by 50% or create a 50% SEL implementation specialist. Everyone talks about SEL, but a lot of people don't know how to implement it. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting schools and doing this work. And then I think we've talked about it at our last meeting, but we want to add 2 more additional behavioral specialists in our general fund. That's not including the two additional behavioral specialists that our high schools are going to hire. So each high school is hiring a behavioral specialist, and then we're adding 2 more to the general fund. That will get us to a total of 13 behavioral specialists in the district. So we're currently at 9. There are currently 9 behavioral specialists. This proposal will get us to 11, and when you count the 2 that the high schools are going to pay for out of their title funds, that will get us to 13. On the next page, we talk a little bit about the charter system authority and how we're making a recommendation to shift the funds from the innovation grant bucket to paying for these positions. And on page 22, we're proposing through our general funds that we have a new alternative education model, and we lay out on page 22 the different components of that new alternative ed model. We've talked about this concept of a third-party administrator for substitute teachers and the type of stress, professional stress that is putting on our staff to have such a limited pool of substitute teachers. We believe that by implementing this new initiative that we can address that challenge. And so those are the new initiatives that we're proposing through our budget.
Okay. Thank you. Questions? Dr. Knowles.
So, as I understand it, since this meeting was originally for the budget, this is the time to ask any additional questions. Is that right? Okay, let me start with what we just got. With regard to the Assistant Chief of Police, as I understand it, if we approve this part of it as part of the overall budget, we'll have 6 sworn officers of our PD, but 1 will be a chief and 1 will be an assistant chief. Yes. Or if you include the SROs, it would be a chief and assistant chief of 2 out of the 12 total. That's right.
So, well, we have 5 officers that work for the Clark County School District Police Department. We have 5. And then we have a memorandum of understanding where we work with Athens Clark County Police Department to have an additional 6. We call those officers SROs. They're school resource officers because they are employees of ACCPD. So this initiative would move our police department in the Clark County School District to 6 total officers.
Does it eliminate the clerk?
It does not. So that the part of the MOU with ACCPD stays in place.
Thank you.
So, my follow-up question then is, the tasks that are required of this person, are they appropriate to an assistant chief level, or are they appropriate to another officer? Because I could imagine somebody say that's a lot of chiefs, we're not a big tribe, so to speak.
I think that's a astute perspective. We believe that often our police chief is pulled from everyday duties when emergencies come up, and that leaves our department without leadership in some cases. I'll give you a case in point. If there is a massive disturbance or fight at one of our high schools, the chief is typically drawn to that situation. If another situation happens, which that happens often, then there's no one left to continue to do the work of the school system. So earlier this school year, we had a water main break near a school, which then flooded the pathway for buses. The chief of the police, of our police department, had to go to that situation. Then a major fight happened at one of our high schools, which then left the chief to say, well, where do I go? What do I do? And we scrambled. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we made this an assistant chief position. I think the other, as you see here in our description, we know that we have to upgrade what we do with our surveillance cameras in the district. Many, as the board has pointed out and has charged me to work on this, many of them have been analog, and we're trying to move to more up-to-date technology. Part of that technology is to then have the capability of someone's watch our cameras throughout the district and to make decisions right away, administrative decisions at that level. And those are some of the rationales behind making it an assistant chief position.
Yeah, Dr. May. One additional social worker, how many social workers do we have at present?
9. 9.
Okay. Now, I think I'm correct when I say this. Are these still housed at the individual schools or?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Back to the conversation about the assistant chief of police, you mentioned there were a certain number of officers that were employed in Clark County, and then the others were a result of the memorandum of understanding with the district, or with the police department. Where do you see sort of,
The vision.
yeah, like how does this fit into a vision as far as our relationship with Clark County?
I think we'll always have a relationship with ACCPD, but gradually over time, we believe that it's more advantageous for us to have a police department that's focused on community policing in a school setting and having officers who have training specifically on hand working with adolescents and young people, again, from a community policing perspective. I think this is a good time for me to kind of talk about our key performance indicators, because sometimes as an administrator, I get drawn on and talk about KPIs. But if I could just share, and I think I may have shared this with you before, if I have, I apologize. But one of our key performance indicators is to ensure that our police force of 5 are going to all of our schools and checking the perimeter on a daily basis. That stretches us because with only 5, everyone can't get to the schools when they need to. But what we found through that task of getting to each of our schools, we charged our police officers who are CCSD police officers to then go into the schools and to talk to the kids and to form relationships, and to police through the lens of these are children and staff that we're serving. That's a very different perspective than the training that someone who appropriately had been trained to work on the ACCPD. It's just a different perspective. We've also started to do some visits to other school systems in Georgia who have taken on the perspective of you always want to have a relationship with your municipality police force, but bringing that type of service in-house and making sure that you have a clear alignment with our social, emotional perspective and framework, and how do you work with children. That's our goal of shifting to that type of policing in our schools. The last thing I would say is that we've already started to do the costing on, so what does it cost to have body cams for our police officers, our CCSD police officers? Right now, the only body cams that are on police officers in our schools are the police officers from ACCPD. And so we're starting to professionalize and increase the expectations of our police department with the idea that as we grow our capacity, maybe we can take on more of that responsibility and not have to find an external partner.
Yes.
If I may, I think we add some comments to that. I'm happy to see the assistant chief come back because once upon a time, several years ago, we had an assistant chief, and Chief Frank Platt retired, and Fabian was promoted, Fabian Jones was promoted to chief, and he never hired an assistant chief. In addition to that, you all recall what I mentioned when I attended the NSBA conference in Philadelphia, 2 buzzwords, equity and what? School safety. But what's going on around this country now? I tell you, we need it because sometimes you walk around and you think that, what's going to happen here? You don't know that. You don't know where it's going to happen. Just recently, was it last week? We had a shooting in the school, and it's going on all over this country. So we need to be aware of that and be cautious of that. Thank you.
And with our current officers, I think this has come up before, but they have training in verbal and physical de-escalation that's consistent with our practices in Clark County. Is that correct?
Chief, I think Chief is at a conference now on understanding the teenage mind, I think is the title of the conference.
Yes, I saw him. I sat in on part of that.
Okay, so that's, what was the title again? The teen brain. Yeah, thank you. So that's the perspective we want our officers to, in that type of training, we want them to go through. Understand. So understandably, police officers from ACCPD, they have a different, they're trained differently. And it makes the work difficult because we can get lucky and find the right SROs at our schools, but sometimes you don't find the right SROs. And that makes the relationship work well. We've been lucky here, we have had the right SROs, but I've been in situations where you don't have the right SROs in schools, and they don't approach the work and treat our kids.
I had a question about the social emotional staff item on page 20. It says here that of those surveyed in the spring of 2019, I'm assuming that's part of the Trago Ed situation appraisal. Is the survey was part of that?
The survey was a survey of our administrators.
Okay, so that was my question.
Yes.
What was the survey? Was that school principals and district leaders?
Yes, sir. But just as a side, so those are the data points, Dr. Nuss, that we're referencing here, but through our Feedback Friday groups, that we asked a lot of questions around SEL, and it has been, I can't go out in the community without people saying we need more people in this space. So this is also in response to what I've heard from staff members and community members of ensuring that we have more SEL staff. We have limited funds, that's why it's hard to find the funding for it. And that's why we're making the difficult recommendation of reducing our innovation grant funds. We're not eliminating, and I think if I may just pivot to that point, there will still be a total of $150,000 available for grants for LSGTs to pursue. It will be more of a competitive grant model. And in fact, the largest grant block that you can receive is $40,000 if you partner with a neighboring school. So the best example I can give you is if Alps Road and Clark Middle came together and submitted a joint grant, they are able to receive more money. But we believe that process actually supports our charter application of creating community schools and in making sure that we're bridging that work. So the grant process isn't going away, it's simply becoming a little more competitive. The feedback that we've received from our principals is that they're struggling with trying to find things to spend the money on. And there are some times where they feel like they are spending the money because they've been given the funds and they have to utilize it. We think through a more competitive grant process that would be healthy. Ms. Suggs has a LSGT charter system focus group that she meets with monthly. The feedback there, and I had a chance to sit in on their meeting last month, or for this month, and the feedback they provided was that we should provide training for the LSGTs going into a more competitive grant model. Because right now LSGTs are just used to writing their own grants because the money's there. And so to be fair, we should start thinking of how do you train LSGTs to pursue a competitive grant. And so that's part of our work, and one of the rocks that's going to be with community engagement and strategic partnerships. Thank you.
Thinking, that they have a hard time spending money. So I said on the government for the winter bill, I'm not sure what Dr. Elderman has said, being part of that. And being out there in that rural area, I know that being able to have these innovative activities, it brings life to our students. and they give them an additional area of learning that they would not get otherwise. So I'm really disappointed that we are losing that, and that the governance team were not actually brought part of the discussion. You know, I just want to say that.
Thank you. And that's why we placed on page 21 the logic behind the work of a charter system, and that ultimately the charter is a charter system. It's not a system of schools. And so that decision, the decision that we're bringing forth to you today, is a decision that we have to make at the district level.
And with I guess related to that, I heard you mention that there's an LSGT. We've talked about this before, the LSGT group. I think that
Their official title, the Charter Advisory Board.
yes. So my question is, what has been done to get the feedback of the actual LSGTs? I'm assuming that advisory group is where there may be one representative of the LSGTs that are on.
What's the makeup for it?
All on LSGTs. What feedback, other than training, like in addition to training, what additional feedback have you received about using the innovation funds in a different manner?
The feedback was very positive, and we explained what the mission was, that we were using to support the students, faculty, and staff, and ask questions. I'm really concerned about how to make sure that it's not the same school year, which is certainly a concern. That was one of the reasons.
Please repeat the public.
So they asked some very good questions. One of the questions that came up, was a concern around how we make sure that in a competitive process that it's not the same schools year after year winning that, which is kind of why we want to make sure that we would do training, so that everyone is able to compete successfully for it. But they were supportive of shifting the funds to the SEL staff that have been volunteer.
Thank you.
My question would be, again, if we have innovative programs happening in the school this year, and I've got to again compete next year to have that program, do we see continuity? Are we able to measure the effectiveness of innovation programs that are generated by innovation grants?
Well, that's actually, I think, one of the kind of positive changes about this is right now with a smaller number of grants, we can be more thoughtful and strategic about capturing what's actually happening in the buildings and really determining what is working well and what isn't working well, what could be replicable and scalable. I mean, right now, with me, that we have multiple grants. Many of our schools have multiple grants. We're just smaller this year, they might be for equipment. So we're trying to really dig in and assess the impact is challenging. We'll be able to do that much more thoughtfully with a smaller number of grants. And we'll also be able to make sure that they're better integrated into the broader framework of things that we're doing. So it's not a school kind of going off in a direction that doesn't necessarily make sense and that we can't support.
I have a question related to that. We had talked about this before, so I was thinking that there wasn't going to be this money in the budget for innovation grants, but when I looked at the budget, I see a line item for innovation grants for 21 of them, so I didn't know what that. It's on right on 9300 charter on the first page. But there's, it has a line item for 21 times 28,000.
Because you haven't passed the budget yet. So if you pass the budget,
So is this not the budget
we're making a proposal to shift $450,000 away from that line item into these positions. If you approve it, then we will make the adjustment, which will then allow us to hire that staff versus the money being in those line items.
So maybe I misunderstood this. So are all of these things in here without any of those changes?
We're making a suggestion to shift those funds to then sponsor and pay for positions. We can't make that decision yet until you give us the authority to hire the positions. Therefore, the current position of those dollars have to remain with the patient.
So everything that, everything that was that document that Dr. Means gave you earlier is in the budget. The one thing we kept where it was previously was the 450, because as in essence last year, that's where it was. And we knew that we were going to redirect that money through the budget process once you approved it. So we were waiting for that authorization before we redirected that 450 to the correct places that it needs to go.
And so those the other recommendations, other than that 450,
They're all in the budget.
that's the only one that is.
Yes, that's the only one we kept in that one location. And the reason was this is, if you come back and say, no, you want to keep the money where it is, then it stays where it is. If you tell us you do want to move it, then what we have to do is go in there and move it to all these different locations that needs to be in, like nurses, social workers, stuff like that. Instead of having all these different locations for you to look, we decided the best thing to do is to keep one location.
I have a question. Of all of these positions that will come from the innovation funds, what does the district see as priority of these?
It's a great question. Actually, we worked with our leaders of nursing, counseling, psychology, social work, and behavioral support. We actually have a plan for $1.5 million. So this $450,000 proposal is a third of what we would actually propose. And I charged Dr. Myers and her team, and the charge I gave them was, okay, if you were fully staffed, and what would it look like? If you were fully staffed and you were able to give me the ability to respond to teachers or the public who said we need more of these positions, how many more do you need? And their price tag is $1.5 million. So what we're sharing with you, it's hard to say which we would give a priority to. Candidly, the priority we would give is the $1.5 million proposal that Dr. Myers and her team created.
I see.
And we want to keep, we're disappointed that we can only bring you $450,000 worth of our priority because we wanted to do it all at once because our kids need it right away. Our staff want us to have it right away. Community wants us to have it right away, but we'll have to build it over time.
I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but I really do want to kind of understand, how we get there. Just looking at our numbers in terms of the disciplinary things that happened last year, it's a little bit concerning. It's very concerning. And so, will this $450,000 give you enough to have an impact?
It's a good start. It's a welcomed change to our current staffing model. And we'll have to just gradually build it in over time. Will it make an impact? Yes, it will make an impact to have an additional school psychologist. Dr. Anna Morgan, who's the leader of our school psychologists, have been asking for more psychologists for years. So to have an additional person would be helpful. To have an additional social worker and to add to that team of 9 to become 10 will be very helpful. To grow our behavioral specialist team from 9 to 11 in general funding, 13 overall, is extremely helpful to our teachers and principals who are actually on the ground. This makes a lot of, and the impact that the increase of our 2 nurses who are currently at 75% going to 100% will mean that our secondary schools will have more support where, believe it or not, that's where a lot of our needs are. A lot of our secondary students are able to identify where their medical needs are. Sometimes those medical needs blend into the social emotional area, and we've had a 3/4 allocation at some of our schools. Well, this doesn't do what we wanted to do with the $1.5 million proposal, but it does put us in the right direction for this school. This is probably an opportune time for me to just point out that with a school district budget, it's not like a federal budget where we're not presenting this as a line item by line item budget. We're saying, here's our overall budget. I know there have been some board members who have said, well, I don't like that initiative. And I don't know if I can support that initiative. We're presenting this as a total package to you.
And so, in essence, that would mean that it's all or all.
That's how we're presenting it to you, yes.
I have a question, more so a concern. I think it's related to what was mentioned earlier. And back to the innovation funds for the schools. So the process is going to get more competitive. We also know that we have work to do with LSGTs, them being more representative of the school populations. And we also know that we have some schools that are struggling, have a different set of challenges. So I hear that there will be training, but how are we sure that those schools will then have access, to these funds? Even they may have unique challenges that another school whose LSGT is sort of maybe a bit more formed and a bit more strategic and quite frankly has a different set of problems. Not a different set, but the pervasiveness of the problem is a little bit different. So how do we be sure about shrinking the funds that those schools are not left out?
It's a great question. Ms. Suggs and I have talked a lot about the fact that we have to do training for our principals. The board has gone through, I believe, a 12-hour training around the charter system, and a prevailing message that you've heard through the external trainers, Ms. Suggs and I, is that we've never trained our principals on how to function within a charter system. That training never happened. We are confident that when we build the capacity of the principals, they will know how to navigate through that competitive grant process. That's why we constructed this new competitive grant process in a way where we are encouraging partnerships with neighboring schools in the neighborhoods to truly lift up the application, mission, and purpose of our charter in the first place. When you read the application that we submitted years ago to become a charter system, we talked about community schools and creating more activity in our neighborhoods. But we've never really made that happen with our charter system. The charter system has been defined by what local school governance teams have done with their innovation grants. And when you look at Appendix B of the charter system, candidly, we skip over Appendix A. So let me start with Appendix A. Appendix A of the charter system says, here are the metrics that you should meet from an academic standpoint, and that's the reason why you've chosen to be a charter system. Throughout our conversation in the community, we rarely talk about the fact that we have some metrics academically that we're supposed to meet, and we're not meeting them right now. Appendix B talks about all the different areas that LSGTs are supposed to be involved in, and the language is most specific and clear around their role in monitoring student progress and growth. And so if you did a crosswalk between student growth and what those innovation grants were doing, I think that's what Ms. Davis was asking a little bit earlier, of do we know that there has been a return on investment on those innovation grants? We're not quite sure. And as Ms. Suggs said, she's a department of one right now. Actually, the innovation grants is encouraging and perpetuating a concept of us as a school system being a collection of schools versus being a school system. And so we believe that through this model, we can not only support our charter, we can now say our charter is about supporting kids from an SEL standpoint, that we actually stand for something. And that our charter, you went to the training, there are charter systems who say that they're focused on CTAE or they're focused on other issues. We can say that we've put a stake in the ground in saying that as a charter system, we took those funds and we're investing it in our SEL work and getting it into the community. Because I don't want to lose sight of the other position of the community engagement position. It's actually extending and making the promise and the purpose of the charter come alive.
The community engagement person is going to be on Claire's staff, right?
Yes. She'll go from a staff of 1 to 2.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the potential of things that can happen with that support from the district office for our LSUTs and our schools in particular. I think what I'm looking for, my gap is simply how in tune are the LSUTs to the overall strategy for that particular school, meeting its development goals, and do they see themselves as being part of it?
So it goes back to the training of the principals. And so the board went through this, and I think Dr. Cook said this. Russ Cook is a former superintendent in Georgia. He gave the training to the board, and he made the example that the role of the principal with an LSUT is comparable to the role of the superintendent with the Board of Education. And I think I've said this, so I'll say it again. I've said it to you before. Most principals don't pursue the superintendency because they don't want to work with the board. So by us creating a charter system, we in essence, we thrust upon them the challenge of working with a board in a more collaborative way. Because if we're a true charter, this is not like a school governance team. It's not like it was prior to us being a charter system. Principals have to work more closely with their LSUTs than they have before. We haven't made that transition. Some of our principals are just naturally gifted and they know what that relationship looks like. Some are not. And it's a skill that they have to learn over time. Dr. Thomas, who's our chief of staff, can speak to the fact that she was a charter, she ran a charter school when Judy and Jackson and Harris opened. And that process of working with that team of community members was different than the type of work her colleagues were doing with PTOs or other parent auxiliary groups. It's a different type of work. And then when you layer on top of it that the main objective, when you look at Appendix B, is for that local school governance team to give counsel and insight on the school progress that's being made by all students. The work looks a lot different than what we've done in the past year.
I tell you, this budget is a wonderful document. It's overwhelming with data. Thank you so much for giving me something to do for the next 6 months. But the other piece of that is if it does hit very squarely on all of the things that I think we're mostly concerned about. I know that safety is important. We tackle safety. We tackle the governance and the LSUT. That's very clearly here. The social emotional learning seems to be the big thing that's hanging over our head as we're the most deficit, as I understand it from the things that I read here and from the reports and all that we have. I just want this budget, this is a big number. I want the budget to bear the fruit of this increase in this year. And I do want us to see those results. And I know you build it that way. I know you build it that way. So when will we know? At what point in this budget cycle will we know if we made some good decisions or will we be in that reaction that really will do that for us?
So, Madam Vice President, in this budget document. Again, I want to just go to the fact, I want to thank my team. That maybe there was a document like this done in the past in Clark County? Okay. But again, the charge from the finance committee, not directly, but it was kind of took the charge of, if we do something, what we wanted to do is to also point out where we're moving from a data perspective. If you go to page 9, Dr. Myers is, she's over the moon about this data that we already have received this year. I think by us focusing on social emotional learning as a tactic to help kids, by us in the last 2 years in particular since I've been here, making sure that that's part of our lexicon and our focus point as a school system, you're starting to see changes in our Georgia Student Health Survey data already. We believe with these additional staff members, so that will be a metric. Ms. Davis can answer your question directly, that this will be a metric that is already, bless you, a KPI that we're using to measure how we're doing with SEL. This will continue to be one of the main points. But we're pleased that we saw growth in all areas in this specific area.
I think I may be mistaken, but I may correct me if I'm wrong. I implemented SEL to this one area.
And I would respectfully say, don't leap there quite yet. That's a natural leap that even educators make right away. We like to use language like student behavior, because student behavior doesn't necessarily have to lead into discipline. And how students behave and how they view themselves is really the first layer. If they don't see themselves in a positive way, if they're unable to manage their own behavior, then it does become a disciplinary issue. But like we like to always say, let's talk about behavior first. And that's why those 5 areas that you see on page 9 are really important. Those are the core competencies. Again, we talked about core competencies earlier this evening about in regards to hiring principals. These are the core competencies that we want students and families and the community to also think about. We want young people who can self-manage themselves, to be self-aware of who they are and how that translates into a certain environment, to be socially aware, to have relationship skills, and to make responsible decisions. Those are the core competencies that we can build those not only in each classroom, but in each school and throughout our community. That's where we can really grow kids. So I'll bring it full circle. So we want an additional police officer for the Ccsd police department, because that will be the type of training we're going to give that individual. It's not the type of training that ACCPD should and appropriately provide to their officers. We want to provide our officers in CCSD training around how do you leverage the core competencies of SEL in working and de-escalating students' behavior to a certain situation.
And I think that's the simplest way to work.
Related to discipline, I think, and SEL, I'm curious about the process. I know, having reached out to counselors and psychologists, student support specialists, how is the ROTC program included in that? Like, I sort of see them serving a critical role for students, really as it relates to some SEL as well as social skills, and in many ways discipline, some of those underlying what adults would see as sort of deficits to navigate the world. I know right now we have programs at both high schools. How are they, or are they reflected in the process, or what we see right here?
I don't want to be the only voice tonight, so at times I may ask my colleagues to come speak, and you may want to hear from Dr. Myers at this point, but you mind if I take a start at it? I think ROTC is an example of multiple opportunities we want to offer to students. So ROTC, I think what students do in drama and theater, what they do in music, what our students do in athletics, those are all opportunities where we're teaching them soft skills, and they're learning how to manage that SEL piece in a safe environment. But candidly, you've heard me talk about something, it's called Tier 1 instruction. If Tier 1 instruction is happening well, in Tier 1 instruction, it means if you have a class of 21 students and you are the third grade teacher, if you are handling Tier 1 instruction well from an academic perspective, you have to think about Tier 1 instruction from a SEL perspective as well. How am I connecting to my kids? What type of environment am I creating as the instructor? And if Tier 1 is happening well, one of our principals who's fairly new to the organization said it best to me, that she saw a decline in student discipline and an increase in attendance when she focused her staff on Tier 1 instruction. So I think ROTC does an amazing job in building those skills. Like, as a school system, the more we can build those opportunities, either being in theater, drama, music, other clubs, and when we see our FF&A kids come and get awards, SEL skills are being built in those situations as well. So we have to be cognizant of building those opportunities. I'll end by sharing with you, so it impacts everybody behind me, because there will be times where our principals are going to come to Ms. Duke and HR and say, I need to pay my advisors more money to have a club. So earlier this year, you've seen the Men of Brick from Gaines and Barnett Scholes here. The stipend that those individuals are receiving is really small compared to the hours of time that they're investing. That's how this is very comprehensive, and that we have to always be cognizant of how does the entire system work together. So I would just conclude by saying, yes, that's very astute of you to say ROTC fits, but I would say the more opportunities we can provide kids in a lot of different environments, the better. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And then I reflect on the kids who were involved in many of those extracurricular and co-curricular activities, and know that there are some that tend to see more of those students that are struggling. They tend to either be scheduled into certain classes, and so yeah, I was just curious as far as when we talk about SEL, how we include, of course, people where that's their primary job, like counselors and in some ways psychologists in an indirect way in the school system, but just wondering how do we continue to get feedback from those other areas that are doing that work, even though it's a part of their mission, but it may not be a direct priority or the number one goal, but it's certainly a part of the work.
And we try to honor those other ROTCs, the coaches, the advisors. We try to honor those people as much as possible to say we know that you're not just advising in that club, you're really building community and building the SEL.
Other questions?
Just this last one around the communities and school movement to elementary schools. The impetus for that is about.
When I look at the schools in the greatest, I've used a term, you probably heard me use this term before. Let me try to define it again. There's a term in school data analysis called the greatest area of need. And so there's a lot of data that you're going to see in school data, but you have to hone in and identify what is the greatest area of need. And then when you identify the greatest area of need, then you have to rally around and say, so what action plan are we going to put in place? And so when I do an analysis of our school communities, and when I say school communities, I'm talking about the school itself and then the communities in which it serves. I am most concerned from an attendance standpoint, so I looked at attendance data, student behavior or discipline data. The two schools that rise to a level of concern is Gaines and Elms. And I saw that in my first 90 days or so in the job. Continuing to be in the community, I've heard people, they use the term, they don't even reference those two schools as schools. It's almost as if they use it as a term. Well, that's Gaines or Alps. And so quickly I realized we needed to support those schools versus continuing to say, well, that's where our data points are not as strong as we want them to be. And so in working with our friends at communities and schools, and I think it's evolved over time in terms of the conversation. I've tried to express that we're not leaving the concept of psych. The site coordinator model is a K-12 model. We just happen to start the implementation of the site coordinator model at the high school in this district. If you look to a district like Charlotte-Mecklenburg, for example, they have site coordinators in elementary schools, middle schools. When you look at other communities and states that are really heavy in the communities and schools, like Texas, you'll see that the site coordinator model is a K-12 model. And so when we look at our schools that are in the greatest area of need, we need to focus on Alps and Gaines. I think my colleagues and my friends at communities and schools and Tim have appropriately said, that's fine. We're ready to serve the schools in the greatest area of need. How are you going to support the kids who are at the high school who have we've created this infrastructure where these kids are receiving support? And Dr. Myers and I talked just yesterday with our director of counseling. I believe it's high time for our counseling departments to step into that space more, and to be that safety net, if you will, for our kids at the high school level. It should be our counselors, it should be the social workers assigned to those schools, it should be the behavior specialists at those schools. Those are the individuals, because we're staffed well. I think we're up to 6 counselors now. So we'll have 6 counselors at Central next year. We'll have 5 at Cedar. Is it 5? 4? So we have enough counselors and social workers and behavioral specialists, I believe, to address those needs. But it's going to be a change in their work. They're going to have to be more proactive and push in and find those kids, because right now we've created an environment where they didn't have to do that work. You know, the site coordinators were the ones stepping into that space, and they did it very well. Now I think it's time for our counselors to do that work instead.
I'm actually pleased that we're going to do this at the elementary level. And yeah, I'm happy about Alps and Gaines. We're putting an awful lot of energy into these 2 spaces. And so I would love to at some point, we're going to talk about it now.
Data, but I don't know if we're able to desegregate it.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to sort of put it in context with the ultimate vision that you've articulated of eventually being able to build our own capacity within our department. And so
I don't think that's going to happen lawfully. We talked about that some years ago when I was a principal, but you do some research on it.
Yes, sir.
Because we did it with police work, not we educated children.
So there's community. I'll try to pivot to what Mr. Worthy is saying. There's sometimes, and I think we need to talk about this as a school community. In some school systems, our vision, there's pushback in the community.
sure.
Because people will say, well, wait a minute. The police department doesn't have access to the children who may be committing a crime. There will be some who will make that statement. As an educator, I believe it's prudent for us to have individuals who are sworn officers, but at the same time have a lens of working with children and adolescents, and candidly working with staff members and making sure, because teachers are unique professionals, and so ensuring that having someone who can stand before a faculty and say, here's why we don't want to prop doors open with a rock. And that's why it's really important to make sure that all the doors are closed. You have to have a certain skill set. And it's not enough. Teachers are going to just say, well, I'm not going to prop the door open because someone stood in front of me with a uniform. You need to have someone who has an educator who wants to say, here's the reasons why this isn't good for our kids. And when you go to certain trainings like understanding the team mind, you're able to express that in a different way. So that's why our vision is one in which we want to have our own force eventually. But again, in certain Georgia communities who have moved in that direction, there's pushback from those police departments or community members who would say, are you trying to purposely shut us out? Are you trying to conceal crimes that we would normally be able to arrest kids for if we had an SRO in your building? And that we're not trying to conceal anything, but I am thinking pro-student versus allowing law enforcement to truly perpetuate the school to prison pipeline.
Thank you.
I don't mind saying that publicly. I hope the board supports that statement, but that's part of the vision. We think if we move in this direct direction, I know there's community conversation around this. We believe that this vision purposefully creates a pathway to lessen that school to prison pipeline if we have a police department that is focused on kids first and building capacity, teaching kids how to de-escalate, having that crosswalk between our SEL efforts and what they're doing from a community policing standpoint in our schools. And so I want the community here, clearly that's our vision, that's our action, because I think often community activists will say, we're not being heard. I'll conclude, Madam President, by saying a budget should reflect your values. A budget should reflect what you want kids to have. We hope that the board and the community sees that these are our values, that these are the things that we see most important. And while an assistant chief of police may sound very forceful in terms of the title, when you read the description of what we want that person to do, it's not about traditional policing.
Any other thoughts or questions?
I have a totally different question, and it has to do with the QBE funding. On one of the pages of the PowerPoint, it talks about each school has to have 450 FTE. I know I'm looking at you, Mr. Hamlin, you're going to get up. And then that we have 5 schools that don't meet that 450, and I was just curious what that means for.
That means that those schools don't get fully funded because they're below the threshold. And so there's an amount of money that we don't get because of that. It's not a huge decrease, but there's an amount of money we cannot get.
And I'm assuming that the schools that have over that, do they get?
They get fully funded, yes.
Okay. Fully funded based on the number of students they have, or
No.
fully funded based on 450?
Fully based if they exceed that minimum requirement for the amount of students at the school.
Other questions?
So, this was, go ahead.
Madam President, if you don't have any other questions, the community has an opportunity to have a similar experience with Mr. Hamlin and our staff on May 28th, May 30th, and June 4th. This document, hopefully this will help spur more really when those meetings take place. I observed for 2 years and saw that people come to the meetings and you really have to dig to figure out what you're going to talk about. We hope that this will spur more conversation and allow people to have more access to the discussion.
I really appreciate that documentation, it's very helpful.
Yes, as we could place on the website ahead of time. So yes,
Okay,
We'll put it out tomorrow.
thank you. And so, am I correct, colleagues, in moving to the next agenda item?
Yeah.
All right. Yes, so that would be discussing the attendance. Who's going to attend the 28th, 30th, and June 4th?
Volunteer for the 28th.
So,
I volunteer for the 30th.
Okay. I can only attend the 28th, for the, June 4th, 1 and 2.
And then that same also. We need to do two.
right, you mentioned it's normally two people there, is that correct? Mr. Worthy, so what's your preference, the 28th or the 4th?
28th, which is fine.
All right, so we have,
And there's a possibility that I can also attend the, 4th, June, 4th.
okay. So right now, for definites on the 28th, we have Ms. Davis and Mr. Worthy, and Dr. Knox on the 30th.
also, Madam President, Chair.
Third. I think I can do the 4th as well. Yes, I will.
I can't do the fourth too, I have to.
Okay.
Also, we have a few people that might be able to volunteer that aren't here tonight.
Others, okay.
I think we're good with that.
Okay. All right, so we have on the 4th, Kara, Dr. Dykeman, and myself. 30th, Dr. Knox and Dr. Maddox, and 28th, Ms. Davis and Mr. Worthy. And if there are any changes that need to be made, we can communicate that. Is that okay with everybody? Any questions or further discussion on that? Okay. All right, it looks like we are at the place in the agenda for the executive session.
Madam Chair, move to go into executive session. We'll probably have to specify exactly what.
I need to, okay.
Time to read it.
All right, I had a nightmare that I was trying to read this and couldn't read it. But I recommend an executive session for the following reasons. The appointment, employment, compensation, hiring, dismissal, or evaluation of employees. We take a vote, there was a first, a motion.
Motion second.
All right, all in favor?
Thank you.